The morning of August 17th, 2004, started like any other Tuesday in the small lakeside town of Elmwood, Pennsylvania. 17-year-old Kyle Brennan kissed his mother goodbye, grabbed his basketball, and headed out the door with a promise to be home by dinner. His mother, Linda Brennan, watched from the kitchen window as her son walked down their quiet street, his worn sneakers scuffing against the pavement. She had no way of knowing that would be the last time she'd see him. Kyle wasn't the type to cause trouble. He worked part-time at his uncle's hardware store, played point guard for Elmwood High's basketball team, and spent his weekends fishing at Crystal Lake with his best friend, Tommy Rhodes. Teachers described him as reliable, maybe a bit reserved, but always present. He had plans, community college in the fall, maybe join the forestry service like his late father. Simple dreams for a small-town kid. If you're watching this, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we share these important stories. That Tuesday afternoon, Kyle told Tommy he was going to shoot hoops at the community center near the lake. Several people saw him there around 2:30, practicing free throws alone. Mrs. Patricia Hoffman, who lived across from the courts, remembered waving to him. He seemed perfectly normal, she'd later tell police, maybe a little quiet, but that was just Kyle. By 7 o'clock that evening, Linda started to worry. Kyle never missed dinner without calling. By 9, she was frantic. She drove to the community center, to Tommy's house, to the hardware store. Nothing. At 10:15, she called the Elmwood Police Department. Deputy Frank Martinez took the report. Missing teenager last seen at the basketball courts. He assured Linda that most teens who disappeared turned up within 24 hours, usually staying at a friend's house or cooling off after an argument. But Linda insisted there was no argument. Kyle was happy. Everything was fine. The search began the next morning. Volunteers combed the woods surrounding Crystal Lake. Police questioned Kyle's friends, teachers, and neighbors. Tommy told them Kyle had seemed distracted lately, maybe worried about something, but he couldn't say what. Kyle's locker at school revealed nothing unusual. Textbooks, a photo of his dad in his forestry uniform, a basketball schedule. Days turned into weeks. The FBI got involved, suspecting a possible abduction. They interviewed registered offenders in the county, checked security footage from the few stores in town that had cameras. Kyle's face appeared on missing person posters throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Linda did television interviews, her voice breaking as she pleaded for information. If someone has my son, please, just let him come home. Detective Sarah Winters, assigned to the case from the state police, found inconsistencies in the timeline. Kyle had been seen at the courts until around 3:45, but then there was a gap. No one saw him leave. No one saw him walking home. It was as if he'd simply vanished from the basketball court. The investigation hit dead ends. Cell phone technology in 2004 wasn't what it would become. Kyle didn't have a phone. There were no surveillance cameras at the community center. The last concrete sighting was Mrs. Hoffman's wave at 2:30. One lead seemed promising. A gas station attendant in Harrisburg, about 60 miles away, thought he saw someone matching Kyle's description on August 18th, the day after he disappeared. The teenager had asked for directions and seemed nervous. But when police showed him Kyle's photo, he couldn't be certain. The lead went nowhere. As autumn turned to winter, the searches became less frequent. Linda refused to give up. She organized volunteer groups every weekend, plastering new posters, walking the same trails again and again. Tommy graduated without his best friend. The empty seat at graduation felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Detective Winters never closed the file, but without new evidence, there was nothing to pursue. She suspected Kyle might have run away, though it didn't fit his character. Another theory suggested he'd drowned in Crystal Lake. The water was deep and murky in places, with underwater caves that divers found treacherous, but search teams found no evidence, no body, no clothing, nothing. Years passed. Linda kept Kyle's room exactly as he'd left it, his basketball shoes by the door, his homework from that final Monday still on his desk. She aged rapidly, the mystery consuming her. Tommy went to college, became an engineer, but the guilt of surviving while his friend vanished never left him. The case grew cold. New missing person cases demanded attention. Elmwood moved on, though Kyle's disappearance remained the town's greatest unsolved mystery. The basketball court, where he was last seen, became an unofficial memorial. People left flowers, notes, tokens of remembrance. By 2010, even Linda had to accept that she might never know what happened to her son. She continued her vigils, but hope had transformed into something else, a desperate need for closure, for answers, even if they brought heartbreak. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, and it took 19 years. In May 2023, a man named David Prescott was doing what millions of others do, browsing Google Earth. David had grown up in Elmwood, but moved away in 2008. He was feeling nostalgic and decided to explore his hometown virtually, zooming in on familiar streets and landmarks. When he navigated to Crystal Lake, something caught his eye. The satellite image was recent, taken during an unusual drought that had lowered the water level significantly. Near the eastern shore, about 40 yards from the old community center, there was a shape beneath the water that didn't look natural. David zoomed in closer. It looked like a vehicle, the outline of a car, clearly visible in the shallow water. He felt a chill run down his spine. He'd been friends with Kyle, though not as close as Tommy. He remembered the disappearance, the searches, the years of unanswered questions. He called the Elmwood Police Department immediately. Detective Marcus Webb, who had inherited the cold cases when Detective Winters retired, was skeptical at first. People called with tips all the time, sightings, theories, dreams. But when David sent him the Google Earth coordinates, Webb pulled up the image himself. There was definitely something there. Within 48 hours, a dive team was in Crystal Lake. The water had risen again since the drought, but they knew where to look. The divers descended into the murky depths, visibility barely 5 feet, navigating by feel and underwater lights. 30 minutes into the dive, they found it, a 1989 Honda Accord, covered in algae and sediment, resting on the lake bottom in an area that hadn't been thoroughly searched in 2004. The divers attached flotation devices and cables. It took 6 hours to carefully raise the vehicle. As the car broke the surface, water streaming from its windows, Linda Brennan stood on the shore, with Tommy Rhodes beside her. She was 68 now, her hair completely white, her face etched with 2 decades of grief. She knew before anyone told her. She'd always known he hadn't run away. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone feared. Skeletal remains were found in the driver's seat, along with a student ID card. Kyle Brennan had been in that car for 19 years. The investigation that followed pieced together what most likely happened on that August afternoon in 2004. Kyle had left the basketball courts around 3:45, but instead of walking home, he'd gone to his uncle's hardware store parking lot, where his uncle let him occasionally borrow an old Honda, the same car now pulled from the lake. Kyle wasn't legally allowed to drive alone. He only had a learner's permit. But it wasn't unusual for teenagers in small towns to bend those rules. His uncle, Roger Brennan, had been devastated by the disappearance and died in 2016, never knowing his nephew had likely borrowed the car that day. Investigators theorized that Kyle had driven toward the lake, perhaps to think, perhaps to meet someone. The eastern access road near the community center had a boat launch, but it was poorly maintained and had eroded significantly. Tire marks preserved in old photographs from 2004 showed evidence of disturbance, but at the time, no one connected them to Kyle's disappearance. The most likely scenario was that Kyle had pulled up near the water, perhaps too close to the edge. The embankment might have given way, or he might have accidentally hit the gas instead of the brake. The car would have rolled into the water quickly. Crystal Lake's eastern shore dropped off sharply in that area, 15 feet within just a few yards of the bank. Trapped inside, possibly knocked unconscious by the impact, Kyle wouldn't have been able to escape. The car sank into a section of the lake that was deeper and more isolated than the main areas where search teams had focused their efforts in 2004. The underwater topography created a shelf that hid the vehicle from sonar sweeps that had been conducted closer to shore. For 19 years, he'd been less than 200 yards from where his mother stood holding vigil, where Tommy had cried on the anniversary of his disappearance, where the whole town had searched and wondered and grieved. The funeral took place on a grey morning in June 2023. Half of Elmwood attended. Tommy delivered the eulogy, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. Kyle was my best friend. For 19 years, I wondered if I could have done something different that last day, if I'd missed some sign that he needed help. Now I know the truth. It was a terrible accident. He didn't leave us. He was here all along. Linda buried her son next to his father. The headstone read, Kyle Brennan, 1987-2004, forever 17, finally home. The revelation brought closure, but it also reopened painful questions. Why hadn't the initial search been more thorough in that area? The police defended their efforts, noting that in 2004 they had no reason to believe Kyle had access to a vehicle. The focus had been on foot searches and the possibility of abduction. Roger Brennan had never mentioned lending his nephew the car. He likely didn't know Kyle had taken it that day. Detective Webb found himself reviewing decades-old search protocols. "We did everything by the book," he said at a press conference. "But technology changes. Methods improve. This case shows why we can never give up, why every cold case deserves periodic review with new tools." The Google Earth discovery sparked a nationwide initiative. Police departments across the country began systematically reviewing satellite imagery of bodies of water in areas connected to missing person cases. Within a year, 3 other vehicles containing remains were found in different states, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. For Elmwood, Kyle's discovery and final rest brought a bittersweet peace. The basketball court memorial was replaced with a proper monument, a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Kyle Brennan and all those who wait to be found." Tommy established a scholarship fund in Kyle's name for students pursuing environmental science or forestry, the dream his friend never got to fulfill. Every year on August 17th, he drives to Crystal Lake and stands at the shore, remembering the friend who never made it home for dinner. The friend who remained hidden in plain sight for 19 years until a random act of curiosity and modern technology finally revealed the truth. Linda lived 3 more years, long enough to see her son properly buried, long enough to know what happened. She died peacefully in 2026, and her last words to Tommy, who visited her in the hospital, were simple. "Tell Kyle I'm coming. Tell him we'll all be together soon." The case of Kyle Brennan serves as a reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are closer than we imagine, waiting in the depths, waiting for technology to advance, waiting for someone to look at the world from a different angle. It's a story of tragedy, but also of persistence, of the power of new tools to solve old mysteries, and of a mother's love that never wavered through 19 years of not knowing. Crystal Lake still reflects the Pennsylvania sky, its surface calm and unrevealing. But those who know the story look at it differently now. They know what it held for so long. They remember the 17-year-old boy who drove too close to the edge, who became a ghost in his own town, present but invisible until the world learned to see through water and time. The years that followed Kyle's discovery transformed not just Elmwood, but how missing person investigations were conducted across the United States. Detective Marcus Webb became an unexpected advocate for technological integration in cold case reviews, traveling to conferences and police departments to share what he called the Crystal Lake lesson. That the tools we have today can answer questions from yesterday if we're willing to look again. In Elmwood, the psychological impact rippled through the community in waves. Those who had been teenagers with Kyle, now in their late 30s, found themselves processing a grief they thought they'd already navigated. Amy Chen, who had sat behind Kyle in English class and harbored a quiet crush on him, attended a grief counseling session organized by the town in the wake of the discovery. "I moved on years ago," she told the group, her voice shaking. "I got married, had kids, built a whole life. But when they found him, it was like being 17 again. Like losing him all over again, except this time we knew he'd been right there the whole time." The hardware store that Roger Brennan had owned changed hands twice after his death, eventually becoming a small cafe. The new owners, unaware of the connection, were shocked to learn that the missing teenager whose story had consumed the town had borrowed a car from their parking lot on that fateful day. They placed a small photo of Kyle behind the counter with a handwritten note, "Rest easy, Kyle. We remember." Tommy Rhodes struggled more than most. The revelation that Kyle had been in the lake during all those searches, all those anniversaries, all those nights Tommy had driven past Crystal Lake, wondering if his friend was alive somewhere, was almost too much to process. His wife, Jennifer, noticed he'd started taking detours to avoid driving past the lake. "I keep thinking about all the times I was right there," he confessed to her one night. "I took my kids fishing on that lake. I proposed to you on that shore. He was there. He was always there." Jennifer encouraged him to speak with Dr. Raymond Foster, a therapist specializing in delayed grief and trauma. Through months of sessions, Tommy worked through what Dr. Foster called complicated mourning. Grief that had been frozen in uncertainty for 19 years, then suddenly thawed with devastating finality. "The not knowing was torture," Tommy said during one session. "But at least it allowed for hope. Some tiny part of me thought maybe Kyle had run away. Maybe he was living some different life somewhere. Maybe he was happy. Now I know he died scared and alone, probably confused about what was happening. Probably thinking about his mom. And I can't stop imagining those final moments." Dr. Foster helped Tommy reframe his thinking. "Kyle didn't suffer for 19 years, the therapist reminded him. "His suffering, if there was any, was brief. The suffering belonged to those who loved him and didn't know. You carried that weight. He was at peace long before you found him." The therapy helped, but Tommy knew he needed to do something more concrete. In 2024, he partnered with a technology company in Pittsburgh to develop software that could scan historical satellite imagery of bodies of water, using machine learning to identify potential submerged vehicles. They called it the Brennan Protocol. The first test of the software identified 43 possible submerged vehicles in lakes and rivers across Pennsylvania. By the end of 2024, 12 of those had been investigated and 5 contained vehicles connected to missing person cases. 2 of those cases involved teenagers who had disappeared in the 1990s, bringing closure to families who had spent decades wondering. Margaret Ellis was 72 when divers pulled her son's truck from a reservoir outside Pittsburgh. Jacob Ellis had vanished in 1997 at age 19, last seen leaving a party. For 27 years, Margaret had believed he'd been murdered, his body hidden somewhere impossible to find. The truth was simpler and more tragic. He'd taken a wrong turn on an unfamiliar road late at night, driven off an unmarked embankment, and sunk into water that search teams in 1997 hadn't thoroughly examined. "I thought I'd feel relief," Margaret told a reporter after Jacob's funeral. "And I do, in a way, but mostly I feel angry. Angry that he was so close. Angry that it took this long. Angry that a boy in Pennsylvania had to die in 2004 for technology to advance enough to find my son in 2024. Her anger was shared by many families connected to the cases solved through the Brennan Protocol. It raised uncomfortable questions about police resources, search methodologies, and the role of funding in missing person investigations. Detective Webb found himself defending decisions made by predecessors while simultaneously acknowledging that more could have been done. "We worked with what we had," he said during a contentious town hall meeting in early 2025. "In 2004, we had volunteer divers with limited equipment, sonar that was expensive and not widely available, and no reason to believe Kyle had access to a vehicle. Should we have searched more thoroughly? Yes. But it's easy to say that now, with 20 years of hindsight and technology that didn't exist then." Linda Brennan never attended that town hall. By then, she was in declining health, her body finally giving in to 2 decades of stress and sleepless nights. She spent her final years in a small apartment overlooking Crystal Lake, a choice that surprised many but made sense to those who knew her best. "She wanted to be near him," Tommy explained to visitors. "For 19 years, she felt like she'd abandoned him by not finding him. Now, she knew where he was. She wanted to be close." Tommy visited Linda weekly during those last years. They'd sit on her small balcony, looking out at the water, sometimes talking, often silent. Linda showed him photos from Kyle's childhood, birthday parties, fishing trips, the day he made the basketball team. "He was such a good boy," she'd say. The same phrase repeated until it became a kind of mantra. In one of their final conversations, Linda asked Tommy a question that had clearly been weighing on her. "Do you think he was scared?" At the end, Tommy had thought about this question himself countless times. He'd consulted with the medical examiner, with accident reconstruction experts, with anyone who might provide an answer that would bring comfort. "I think it happened fast," he told her honestly. "The angle the car was at when they found it suggests it rolled quickly. He might have been unconscious from the impact. He might not have known what was happening." It wasn't certain, but it was possible, and possibility was all Linda had left to hold on to. She died on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Kyle had disappeared. Tommy was with her, along with a hospice nurse and Father Patrick from St. Anne's Church. Her last moments were peaceful. She looked toward the window, toward the lake visible in the distance, and smiled. "I see him," she whispered. "He's waiting." The funeral was smaller than Kyle's had been. Linda had outlived most of her generation, but the community turned out to honor the mother who had never stopped searching. Her obituary read, "Linda Brennan devoted her life to finding her son. In the end, she found him and finally found peace." Tommy buried her next to Kyle and her husband, Thomas Brennan Sr., who had died in a logging accident when Kyle was 12. The 3 graves formed a row, father, son, and mother reunited after years of separation. The basketball court where Kyle was last seen playing became a genuine community gathering place after his discovery. What had been a somber, avoided space transformed into something different, a place where people came not just to remember tragedy, but to celebrate the ordinary moments that Kyle never got to experience. Parents brought their children to play basketball there, teaching them to shoot free throws on the same court where Kyle had practiced. Teenagers studied on the benches, couples walked hand in hand along the path that led to the lake, and every August 17th, the community held a memorial service that felt less like mourning and more like a celebration of the ordinary life that had been cut short. the Brennan Protocol continued to expand beyond Pennsylvania. By mid-2025, 12 states had adopted the software, and discussions were underway to implement it nationally. Tommy traveled frequently, speaking at conferences and police departments, training investigators on how to use the technology effectively. During one presentation in Seattle, a detective asked him how he coped with the constant reminder of his friend's death. Tommy paused before answering. "Every case we solve using this technology, every family that gets closure, that's Kyle's legacy. He didn't get to do the things he planned, didn't get to become a forest ranger, didn't get to have a life. But through what happened to him, through the tragedy of his death remaining hidden for so long, we've developed tools that are bringing other people home. That matters. That has to matter."